Okay, we'd be seated. Ms. Hall, come down, back up, please. You're still under oath. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Honor. I'm going to pick up with a couple of follow-up questions for you, okay?
Okay.
That text message you sent to the defendant saying, any news, what's this friend's name, at 10:52, November 19th, what response did you receive from the defendant to that text message?
I didn't.
And then we had talked about whether you recall making telephone calls to any member of law enforcement during the course of the night. And with the court's permission, I'd like to approach you and ask you to take a look at something and see if it refreshes your recollection, okay?
Okay.
Go ahead.
And, Your Honor, I am going to object to this process. The document he's going to show the witness is a prosecution-generated summary outline of referring to several different extraction reports, I believe, contained in DA Master Media Disc 24. It's
Okay. Well, I'm going to overrule your objection, but I'm going to instruct you, Ms. Hall, because anything can be used to refresh memory. It really doesn't matter. However, it doesn't mean you can read this and because you've read it, that's what happened. It has to refresh your memory. And if it doesn't refresh your memory, then we're done with the issue. If it does, great. Okay?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Honor. May I approach?
Please.
Thanks. Do you recall throughout the evening of November 18th and the early morning hours of November 19th making calls to law enforcement?
Yes.
Does that document refresh your recollection as to making calls?
Yes.
And to the best of your memory, to the best of your memory, fair to say you called them repeatedly?
Yes.
May I approach and retrieve the document?
You may.
So you arrive in the Bayfield Durango area around 2:30 in the morning, and you go to the marshal's office.
Yes.
What happens there?
We meet with deputy, I believe, and I can't even remember his name, and basically just inform them, of what I know, which is very little at this point. And we hang around there for a little while, and then we go to my friend's house, who is where we are staying while we're here.
What friend was that?
Amber Harrison?
And Ms. Harrison also served as your attorney in the divorce proceeding at some point, right?
Yes.
And did you stay overnight with Ms. Harrison?
We stayed with her the whole time. We were here in Durango looking for Dylan.
Approximately how long did you sleep that night after you arrived in the Bayfield Durango area?
I don't think I did sleep.
What was the reason for that, Ms. Hall?
I was
relevance.
I think it's okay. Go ahead.
I was stressed out because I didn't know where my son was.
And in the days and weeks ahead, what types of efforts did you, as Dylan's mother, engage in to try to find Dylan?
Everything I knew. I mean, we had driven up to Vicedo, standing in the middle of the road, just calling his name. I mean, we did foot searches with just my immediate family around Lemon, around Durango, everywhere up there. Then I had a really good friend of mine who worked for, at the time, the Pine River Times, and she started organizing searches and grids and things like that, and I just basically followed her lead because she was really organized.
You say followed her lead. Did you participate in those searches?
Yes.
You also meet with investigators?
Yes.
How frequently were you meeting with investigators during that time period?
As often as they would meet with me. I mean, I bugged them.
What?
I bugged them.
Bugged them. I couldn't hear you, I'm sorry. When you say you bugged them, what do you mean by that?
It meant that I was calling, or I would just show up at the sheriff's office in Bodo and just show up, see if they had any answers, find out what they were doing. We went to the search and rescue, and were there for a while, and, I mean, just anybody who could help me, I was knocking on the door.
And as the weeks and months went by after November 12th, what was going on for you during that time? After November 18th, 2012?
I mean, I was frantic. Like I said earlier, it was so surreal. You don't expect anything like this to happen to you. And, you know, I figured he was safe because he was with his dad, and I was devastated that no one knew where my son was.
And were you aware from your conversations with law enforcement during this time that different tips and leads were coming in, they were investigating those?
Yes, I knew there were different tips and leads. They didn't necessarily tell me what they were, but yes, I knew that things were coming in.
And when you were out and about, is it fair to say you were just hoping to see Dylan or find Dylan wherever you were?
Yes.
In addition to what you've already shared with the jury about your attempts to locate Dylan, did you also speak with the media during that time to try to generate attention and help in finding Dylan?
Yes.
Did that include going on the Dr. Phil show?
Yes.
I'm going to direct your attention now to June of 2013. There was a search that took place up on Middle Mountain. Do you recall that?
Yes.
What do you recall about that?
I remember, you know, the search was organized. We had a bunch of, people from even out of state coming up to do a grid search is what they called it. And, they were focusing primarily on Middle Mountain because Middle Mountain had been reopened. And I didn't go up, on the mountain. I was staying at a place at the lake,
Lake?
Vallecito Lake.
And what was the reason you were staying in Vallecito at that time?
I really was trying to stay away from media at this point because I was trying to gather my thoughts. You know, of course, we didn't know anything at this time when they were searching. But I didn't really want to, honestly, I didn't really want to find anything of my son when I was up there, so I made the decision to just not go.
You were staying in the area to be close to the search?
Yes.
And at that time, had you provided law enforcement with different pieces of belongings of Dylan?
Yes.
What was the reason you provided them to law enforcement?
Because according to Mark, he didn't have anything with Dylan's scent on it, and the sheriff's office said they needed something with Dylan's scent on it for the dogs.
So you were aware that the law enforcement investigators were seeking belongings of Dylan?
Yes.
They had not received any from the defendant?
Yes.
What did you provide to law enforcement to aid them in the investigation?
A bag of clothes, pillow, blanket. I can't recall specifically, but those articles.
Where did you take those from?
My house and monument. And actually, it wasn't me that gathered those. It was my stepdaughter who gathered them, and then we met in Alamosa to get those items.
Did you recognize those to be Dylan's?
Yes.
And I should ask, during that time when Dylan was missing, what did you do with his bedroom and belongings, if any?
Well, we were here for a while, so obviously nothing, and, you know, I left the room as it was for a while. We had just moved to Monument, so, you know, it wasn't, I mean, he was getting unpacked and organized and such, so.
The items that were collected that you recognized as Dylan's were then provided to law enforcement?
Yes.
All right, can I have one moment?
You may.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
Can you take a look at what's been marked as people's 10 for identification, please?
Yeah, Dylan's hat.
How do you recognize it to be Dylan's hat?
Because he wore it, and, I mean,
That's a hat that was provided to law enforcement to assist them with the investigation, including the work with the dogs.
yes,
Does that hat appear to be in the same or similar condition as to when it was provided to law enforcement? At this time, people move people's 10 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, anticipating chain of custody to be tied up later on.
Well,
I understand that could,
recognizes it as Dylan's hat, I don't see
Right.
there being a chain issue.
Roger, correct.
Okay, so it's admitted.
Your Honor, may I approach what's been marked as people's 11 for identification?
Yes.
What is in people's 11 for identification, Ms. Hall?
chapstick,
Is that a chapstick that belonged to Dylan?
yes,
Provide that to law enforcement as well to aid them in their investigation?
yes,
That chapstick appear to be in the same or similar condition as to when you provided it to law enforcement?
yes,
Your Honor, at this time, people move people's 11 into evidence.
No objection.
It's admitted.
Ms. Hall, you mentioned providing law enforcement with a pillowcase and clothing that belonged to your son Dylan, aid them in the investigation, including the work with the dogs. With the court's permission, I'm going to approach and show you what's been marked as people's 13 for identification.
Go ahead.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, I open the bag and
Is it all on one exhibit? Is
Yes,
that-
Your
Okay, you can, we just need to make sure it gets sealed back up. And make sure you speak up so people can hear you, or take the microphone.
Paul, this bag, when was the last time you've seen what's in this bag?
since we gave it to law enforcement.
Yeah.
I haven't, I mean, I saw it just briefly today,
So you saw it briefly today before coming up to the court.
yes,
Have you had a chance to look inside?
yes,
And what's inside Exhibit 13 for identification?
Dylan's clothes and, pillow, and a blanket. I think that's it.
And the items that are in there that you provided to law enforcement to assist with the investigation appear to be in the same or similar condition as you provided them back in 2005.
Yes,
Your Honor, at this time, people move Exhibit 13 and 7.
No objection.
13's in.
Paul, I have one item within Exhibit 13 in my hands. What is this?
Dylan's pillow,
And how do you recognize these things, Philip?
because I bought him that sheet set, when we moved to the new place. I'm sorry, when we moved into our new place.
Okay, hold on just a second. Paul, you need to speak
Thank you, Your Honor. And this was one of the items you provided to law enforcement to assist with the investigation,
Yes,
so they could locate this.
yes.
So you see better, as long as you're out of everybody's.
It's not about what I can see, it's about wearing gloves all the time.
Oh, approach here.
That's the question I was gonna ask.
Okay.
What are the rules of engagement in handling physical evidence such as today?
Well, if there's no gloves and nobody's wearing them, I mean, if there's future issues about this, I think the prosecution has pretty much waived any problems, right?
Difficult for me to see.
Why don't you come up?
Thank you. That's a hard question.
Go ahead.
I'm just gonna take out one other item here, Ms. Hall. What am I holding in my hands here? The blue and orange.
It's actually red, and it's his Red Sox blanket. He was a big fan of the Boston Red Sox. Oh, that's the Bronco one, sorry.
Right.
Sorry, yeah, you're right, okay.
Bronco fans everywhere. Bronco blanket.
It is,
And there are other items of clothing that belong to Dylan Redwine in Exhibit 13, right?
yes,
I'm not gonna pull each and every one out, but these are all the items that you provided to law enforcement, aid in the investigation, particularly with regard to
yes.
Your Honor, just for the record, we had it unsealed for presentation of evidence in this hall, and I'll have it sealed back up and available.
All right, thank you.
Ms. Hall, did you also provide, an item to aid law enforcement with DNA testing in the event remains were found? I can ask that a different way, I'm sorry. Did you also, provide other items to law enforcement to aid them if DNA testing was conducted?
I'm sure I did, I can't remember specifically what it was. I mean, I know we gave DNA, I gave DNA,
And what was the reason you gave DNA?
in case remains were found so they could identify the match. I'm not sure how well that works, but they asked for it and I gave it.
And with regards to that search on Middle Mountain, at some point were you made aware that items, that your son's remains were recovered?
Yes,
How and when did you receive that information?
I can't remember the specific day, I think it was the Various items were found throughout the week, starting on the 20th of June, I believe. And the first item they had found was Dylan's shoe. And that's when I was told that they found Dylan's shoe. We had to identify it as Dylan's shoe.
What was the process? How'd you end up being able to identify the shoe?
They brought it to me
How'd you recognize it to be Dylan's shoe?
because I bought them.
And what happened after that in the days that followed?
They were still searching, and then they found remains, human remains.
At some point thereafter, were you informed about DNA testing on the remains?
Yes,
What were you informed?
that they were sending them off to, I believe it was CBI. They didn't know how long it would take, but CBI was going to do a rush on it. And then it was shortly thereafter that I got the official notice that those were Dylan's remains.
Where were you when you got the official notice?
I was at our cabin in Bicito that we were staying at.
Your Honor, I have nothing further from Ms. Hall. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, Ross?
Yes, please. And Ms. Hall, if you can't hear me or if I muddle a question, please let the judge know and I'll rephrase, okay?
Okay.
I want to revisit some of the topics you spoke about on direct with Mr. Doherty, starting with one of the things that was you spoke about the divorce and kind of how long that went. Remember talking about that?
Yes,
And safe to say, divorce proceedings started in 2005, right?
I believe so, yes.
And I think you agreed with Mr. Doherty's description of the divorce as less than amiable. And actually, that's mine. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes,
And the divorce proceedings actually went on for years, correct?
it was a long time.
And without getting into the specifics, there were several issues that were litigated from 2005 through the summer of 2012. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes,
And you even mentioned one of those issues on direct about one of the issues that got litigated was the house on Windmill, right?
correct.
And who was going to wind up with the house and some other assets, correct?
Yes,
And that litigation went on for literally years, correct?
literally years, yes.
And as the proceedings developed, divorce pleadings were filed, correct?
Yes,
And then there was a legal separation, correct?
yes,
And then the legal separation was finalized into a divorce in about 2008, right?
yes,
And even after that final order of the divorce in 2008 coming out, there was still litigation after that, right?
there was.
And after all that litigation of these other issues, there were the orders regarding where Dylan would reside and parenting time that came down in 2012, correct?
Yes,
And you told the jury that for the vast majority of these proceedings, you were actually living in the Bayfield area, correct?
I was living in the Windmill house, yes.
Right. And is that in Bayfield or around there?
The physical address was Durango, but it was in Bayfield School District, so,
Okay. And then you moved to essentially Colorado Springs in July, August of 2012, right?
yes,
Okay. And it was shortly thereafter that you filed a motion with the court for Dylan to move with you to Colorado Springs, correct?
yes,
And that request was filed with the court here in Durango, shortly before Mr. Redwine and Dylan went on their trip to the east to see baseball, correct?
I can't recall specifically when it was, entered or requested, but, yeah, I mean, it was done around the July, August 2012 timeframe.
Okay. And safe to say, you recall that Mark Redwine and his attorney objected to that, correct?
Yes,
And you asked to move Dylan to Colorado Springs. Mr. Redwine and his attorney objected, and then I think you guys responded to that objection, and there was eventually a court hearing, correct?
yes,
And while that was going on, you also filed an emergency motion to enroll Dylan in schools in Colorado Springs while this issue was pending, correct?
yes.
So in September of 2012, there were a number of issues continuing to be litigated in this divorce, correct?
Yes,
And by and large, those issues were concerning where Dylan would live, correct?
yes,
Where he would go to school,
right,
and whom he would live with,
yes,
you or Mr. Redwine.
yes,
And ultimately, as you testified on direct, the court ruled that Dylan would live with you in Colorado Springs, correct?
yes,
And the court also ruled that Dylan would attend school in the district where you were residing or thereabouts. Is that right?
yes,
Okay. And then the court also made findings about what kind of visitation, what kind of parenting rights Mr. Redwine would have as well, correct?
yes,
And those included a court order that Dylan would go to Mr. Redwine's house in Vallecito for the Thanksgiving vacation days, correct?
yes.
And that day that the order came down saying where Dylan would live, where he would go to school, that you would have to visit Mr. Redwine on Thanksgiving, that same day, you know that Mark bought him a ticket to come to Durango on an airplane, correct?
I do recall that, yes,
Okay. So the order comes down, you win, he loses, Dylan's going to Colorado Springs, Dylan's coming to Vallecito for Thanksgiving. The day that order comes down, Mr. Redwine buys Dylan a plane ticket to come out for Thanksgiving that same exact day.
I believe so, yes,
And safe to say, that proceeding in September regarding where Dylan would live and attend school, that was what we call a contested hearing, correct?
yes,
That was not agreed to by you and Mr. Redwine,
correct,
and that was litigated by you and Mr. Redwine.
yes,
And Mr. Redwine and his legal team litigated that issue very vociferously, very hard, correct?
they did.
In the lead up to the Thanksgiving visit, you testified on direct that you got to see and observe Dylan's enthusiasm or lack thereof to go to Vallecito, safe to say.
Yes,
Okay. And obviously you were living with Dylan at the time, so you got to see him probably just about every day.
I saw him every day, yes,
And based upon those observations and conversations, that you had with Dylan regarding the visit in Thanksgiving, you were left with some impressions and some concerns, quite frankly, about Dylan coming to Vallecito to visit Mr. Redwine, correct?
Yes.
And from your interactions with Dylan, you knew at least one thing, and that was that Dylan was excited to come to Bayfield, Durango, at a bare minimum to see his friends, correct?
Yes.
However, he wasn't excited to stay at his father's house, correct?
Correct.
And your understanding from your conversations with Dylan is the reason he was not excited to, one of the reasons he was not excited to stay at his father's house is it was in Vallecito, kind of out in the sticks.
That's one of the reasons, yes.
One of the reasons. And you even said on direct, I believe, that because the house is so isolated, right?
Correct.
Isolated, out in the sticks, and also from your understanding and living in the area, you know that the house in Vallecito on County Road 500 was far away from his friends in the city of Bayfield, correct?
Far away from his friends and everything else, yes.
Right. Because it's literally the house in Vallecito, Mr. Redwine's house, is literally at the end of the road before the campground up there, right?
Yes.
And in fact, you've even characterized that the location of that house as being in the middle of nowhere.
Yes.
So Dylan's excited to see his friends, not excited to be in the middle of nowhere, not excited to be far away from Bayfield, from everything in Bayfield, correct?
Yes.
Now, you testified on direct that, and I need to look at some of the exhibits, permission to approach?
Yes.
You testified on direct that this bag of items is something that was requested of you from law enforcement, correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm in a weird place, so I'm holding a big bag. Where do you need me to be?
Actually, a bit up over here by the microphone.
Okay. And again, you were asked by law enforcement to provide a number of personal items of Dylan, correct?
Yes.
And it sounded like on direct examination, it was not you who collected those items, is that correct?
Correct.
And those items were collected by another family member, did you say it was a stepdaughter?
Yes, my stepdaughter.
Okay. And what is her name?
Ashley Hall. At the time, it was Ashley Hall.
Okay. And law enforcement came to you, because you're the mother of Dylan, and asked you to collect the items that are in this bag, correct?
Yes.
And did you in turn ask your stepdaughter, Ashley, to do that?
My husband actually called her, I believe. But we were in Durango, and I didn't want to go home until I had Dylan with me.
Okay. And did you ever get to talk to Ashley about the collection of these items?
Yes.
And did you tell her how to do it?
Yes, I told her to grab like his pillow and blankets and his clothes. And, Yes.
And did you give her any other instruction?
I really can't remember. I mean, I was pretty frantic. I don't recall.
And permission to open the bag and...
Go ahead.
Thank you. And those items included the pillow, correct?
Yes,
The Broncos blanket, correct?
yes,
It looks like that there's several other items in here as well, correct?
yes,
Your understanding, there's a pillowcase in here as well? You know what else is in here?
I know that there's a bag with a lot of his clothes, and the pillowcase is on the pillow.
Permission to put these on the table in front of you?
Go ahead.
It looks like there's a paper bag in here. Do you have any idea what that is?
No,
It looks like there's an empty plastic bag in here as well.
it may have been what the items were in when we transported them. I don't know specifically.
Your Honor, just for the record, that's the same plastic bag that I just took the Broncos blanket out of.
Okay, thank you.
I'll stipulate to that. That's- And you said earlier that there was a bag with several of his items or clothing in them, correct?
Yes,
Okay, and it looks like there's an open paper bag here, correct?
yes,
And looks like we got a towel. Does that look to be Dylan's?
yes.
How do you know that's Dylan's?
I mean, it's our house towel, and, I know it came from our house, and it was in Dylan's room,
How do you know it was in his room?
from Ashley.
And it looks as though there's a hoodie or a zipper hoodie as well, correct?
Yes,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
And it looks, should we take a lunch break?
Well, we're going to in just a second. I was hoping to get through this.
Okay,
I'm okay. Just emotional.
I understand. Safe to say there's several items in this bag, correct?
Yes,
That were collected by Ashley
yes,
and placed, to the best of your knowledge, by Ashley in this bag, right?
yes.
And then you met Ashley, was it in Alamosa, and then you drove the bag here?
My husband met Ashley in Alamosa.
Okay.
I was here in Durango still.
I'm prepared to stop for lunch.
Okay, and that's fine. Just leave it there. Are you done with the bag, though?
I believe so.
Okay, great. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know that one of you has an appointment they need to be at over the lunch hour, so we're gonna stop a little bit early. Please remember my admonitions. I'm not gonna read them to you. You probably know them by heart. Just make sure you don't do any research on this case, you don't talk about it, you don't let anybody talk to you about the case. We will start up again, let's go ahead and start up again at 1:30, and, you'll need to be back whenever Cindy tells you. So with that, everybody rise for the jury. Okay, if, either Mr. Heidel or Mr. Azell can put all that stuff that came out of that plastic bag back, so it's not everywhere, that would be great over the lunch hour. or whatever investigator you want to have do that. So, anything before we go?
No objection to that procedure, no.
That's fine, Your Honor. I'm also gonna approach and just put the Exhibit 4 disc up with the other exhibits. It ended up back on my table, so I was gonna put it back.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll see y'all, get here a little bit before 1:30, please.
And Judge, I think Mr. Johnson covered this. Did you want to go and look at the living room layout?
Oh,
Or is that?
I totally forgot about it. I'll probably do that now. That's a good idea.
Thank you, Judge.